Yam Brahma Varunendra Rudramarudastunnindu Divyaistavaihi Vedai Sangapada Kramopanishadaihi Gayanti Yam Samagaha Dhyanavasthita Tadgatena Manasa Pashyandi Yam Yogino Yasyandam Navidussurasuraganaha Devaya Tasmai Namaha. Om Sruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavad Padam Shankaram Loka Shankaram. We were dealing with the 25th sloka, verse of the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, the Shankaracharya's commentary in Sanskrit. So towards the end of the commentary on the 25th verse, the Bhashyam makes a very, very important point. He says, there is no punarukti dosha in Moksha Shastra, Vedanta Shastra. Durbodhatva atmastanaha punah prasangam apadya sabdandrena tadeva vastu nirupayati Bhagavan Vasudevaka. So Durbodhatva means very difficult to understand this Advaitic principle, because every moment, every second, every experience is presenting the opposite of Advaitic truth in front of our eyes, in front of our mind. We are always tempted or prompted to mistake the unreal for the real and the real for the unreal. So it's very difficult to understand the truth of Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. So it is Durbodhatva Atmavastunaha punah prasangam apadya. So this fact, this Advaitic reality, Advaitic truth should be expounded again and again. Sabdandrena tadeva vastu nirupayati Bhagavan Vasudevaka. So if you take many of these verses from 11th verse to 24th of the second chapter, especially 23rd and 24th, Nainam Chindanti Shastrani, Nainam Dehadi Pavakaha, Najainam Kledayanti Apo, Nashoshayati Marutaha, and then Akledyoyam, Adahyoyam, Achedyoyam, Adahyoyam, Akledyo, Ashoshayevacha, Nitya Sarvagadasthanahu, Achaloyam Sanatanaha. So it could appear that the Lord Bhagavan Vasudeva is repeating the same idea again and again. And punarukti is a dosha in other traditions of literature. In non-Vedantic literature, punarukti, Pavanapunyam, will be again repeating the same word, same idea, or different words with the same implication, could be considered to be a drawback in non-Vedantic traditions, in non-Vedantic literature. But in Vedanta Shastra, in Moksha Shastra, it is not only not a dosha, but it is a necessity. The reason is Durbodhatvam. It is not easy to cognize, to understand the fact that Brahman is the only reality and the Jagat is Mithya, it is only a relative entity. Because, as I mentioned earlier, every day, every moment, every experience at the empirical level, at the sensory level, at the mental, intellectual level, tends to or appears to mislead us into thinking that this world is the absolute reality. There is nothing other than this psychophysical mechanism. Atman, Brahman, all these ideas are all concepts. This is the wrong misunderstanding that normally every individual living in this world is likely to fall a prey to. So Bhashyam says, Lord Krishna therefore repeats the same idea again and again, Atmavastunaha punah prasangam apadya. The same subject is repeated again and again, Sabdandrena tadeva vastuhu nirupayati. Using different words, the same idea is expounded, emphasized again and again. Katham tu nama samsarinam avyaktam tattvam buddhigocharadam apannam sat samsara nivrittayasya iti. The reason is, Lord Krishna is very much concerned to make this idea clear to spiritual seekers. Therefore, normally what is very difficult to understand, what is beyond the intellectual cognitive power of people living in this world, samsaris. Therefore, this higher idea, which is not easy to understand at empirical level, should be emphasized and expounded and repeated again and again using different similes and different expressions. Now again you find this idea emphasized and repeated from a different angle in the 25th verse. Avyaktoyam achintyoyam avikaryoyam uchyate tasmadevam viditvainam na anushochitum arhasi. This is the 25th verse. Ayam avyaktaha, ayam achintyaha, ayam avikaryaha uchyate tasmad evam enam viditva anushochitum na arhasi. So here the Lord says, this Atman is avyakta, it is unmanifested, it is achintya, it is unthinkable, it is beyond conceptualization, it is beyond intellectualization, it is unchangeable, and therefore this fact should be understood. Somehow one should try to link one's mind to this fact and then should practice Sravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, should try to acquire sadhana chatushtaya sampatti. If you do that, then there will be no cause for you to worry about anything. This is the essence of this 25th verse. So here you find our true identity, our true nature. The Atman is explained, it is beyond explanation, beyond verbalization, which we are going to discuss in course of time. But still all these words are used because they somehow try to give you an intellectual idea of what the reality is, with the purpose of removing the wrong notions that we have already accumulated in our mental system. Shastram tu ajnana nivartakam na jnana pravartakam. Now, it's something very interesting that this idea could be found even in the lives and teachings and philosophical systems of great Greek philosophers like Socrates. So it is said that Crito, who was a disciple and a friend of Socrates, asked one question to Socrates, how he is to be buried? And Socrates' answer is this: in any way you like, but first you must catch the real me. So what did Socrates mean by the real me? Certainly not the type of physical mechanism, because he was going to die very soon, and his friend and disciple tried to ask him how he should be buried after death. And Socrates says, you should catch the real me. Be of good cheer, my dear Crito, and say that you are burying my body only, and do with that whatever is usual, what you think best. Remember and understand that you are actually burying my body, not the real me. So this shows the distant echoes of Vedantic idea, Advaita philosophy, could be found even in alien traditions, even the ancient Greek traditions. Now, Madhusudana Saraswati has given some very interesting explanations to this. Avyaktaha sarvakarana avishayatvat nirvyajyati iti avyaktaha. So what is vyakta? Vyakta is that which could be perceived, understood, conceptualized with the senses of perception and mind. When we see something with our mind and the sense of seeing, the eyes, then we are able to understand, recognize something, we are able to define and interpret it, this intellectual cognition. Or if we try to understand something with the sense of hearing, the ear, sense of touch, sense of smell, sense of taste, all these are different ways of understanding what is Vyakta, what is Pratyaksha. So Madhusudana writes, Yogi Indriya Gocharo Bhavati Sa Pratyakshatva Vyakta iti Uchyate. What is Vyakta? Vyakta is Indriya Gochara. What is visible, what is recognizable to the five senses of perception and mind is Pratyaksha or Vyakta. Ayam tu Rupadhihinatva na tatha. This Atma is beyond intellectual perception because it is not Vyakta, it is Avyakta. But it cannot be called Paroksha either. So the Upanishad literature calls it Aparoksha. So it's Sakshat Aparoksha Brahma as Brihadaranyaka Upanishad puts it. So this Atman cannot be perceived through the senses because it doesn't have a form to see. It doesn't have a voice to hear about. It doesn't have a smell to smell. It cannot be touched. It is not a concrete entity. So it is not possible for anyone to understand this Atman through the sensory perception involving mind and the five senses of perception. Now Vedanta philosophy has got a very elaborate epistemological system that's called a theory of knowledge. So Pratyaksha, Anumana, Upamana, Shabda, Arthabhati, Anupalabdhi. These are the five pramanas accepted by Vedantins and also Bhatta Mimamsikas. Prabhagaras accept only five of them anyway. So we'll come to the subject again. So Madhusudana drives home this idea further. He says this Atman cannot be even inferred. So the destructibility of Atman also cannot be inferred. So Pratyaksha bhave anumanam syar ityadaha achintyoyam. This Atman is achintya. It is unthinkable. So it is unmanifest. It is not Pratyaksha. So it cannot be understood through Pratyaksha pramana. And it cannot be understood through Anumana. So you can't even infer about it. So Pratyaksha bhave anumanam sya ityada aga achintyoyam. Chintyaha anumeyaha tad vilakshanoyam. Kujit pratyaksho hi vanyadi grihida vyaptikasya dhumadehi darshanat kujit anumeyo bhavati apratyakshetu vyaptigrahana asambhavat na anumeyatum iti bhavaha. So as we go further, commentators like Madhusudana, Anandagiri, Shankarananda Saraswati and others who have given elaborate descriptions of Shankaracharya's on Bhashya, going deeper, maybe more elaboration of the Bhashya ideas, is very interesting to read. So Madhusudana says it is achintya. So Anumana also cannot be used to understand this absolute reality Atman. Chintya anumeyaha. What could be thought about, what could be speculated, what could be conceptualized, can be inferred. Kujit pratyaksho hi vanyadi grihida vyaptikasya dhumadehi darshanat. Now the point is, it is beyond direct perception and inference, because Atman cannot be proved by any of the pramanas, and inference is based on direct perception. So Anumana is based on perception of an invariably concomitant symbol, Vyapti. So Anumana cannot be used to understand Brahman because we are always associated the experience of smoke with fire. So when we find smoke somewhere, we normally associate that smoke with fire, because on a previous occasion, through direct perception, through pratyaksha pramana, we have seen smoke and fire coexisting. So elsewhere, if we come across smoke, then we are likely to infer the possibility of fire on that spot from where the smoke is coming. So that kind of anumana pramana also cannot be used to understand Brahman. That's why Ataeva achintyaha ayam. So it is avyakta because sarvakarana avishayatvat navinchiti iti avyaktaha ayam atma. Bhashyam says, this Atman, it is not accessible. It cannot be cognized by the five senses and mind. So it is unmanifest. It is avyakta. It is also unthinkable, achintya, because anumana pramana also cannot be used to understand Brahman or Atman. Ateva achintya ayam. It is, you cannot attain it through thought. You cannot cognize it by conceptualization. Yet he indriyojaram vastu tat chinta vishayatvat apattide ayam tu atma anindriya gocharatvat achintyaha. So that which is a thing of perception to the senses alone can be inferred. Because of previous experience, we can infer, we can use anumana pramana. But this Atman cannot be understood through any of the pramanas. Now, of course, in this context, there are a few very important Vedantic principles to be understood. That is, the realization of Atman is beyond epistemology and theory of knowledge. None of the pramanas can be used to understand Brahman or Atman, because that experience is reached when we reach a stage of sarva pramana avati, the limit of all pramanas, beyond all pramanas. As I mentioned, Advaita Vedantins accept 6 pramanas, that is direct perception, that is pratyaksha, anumana, inference, upamana, which analogy, shabda pramana, verbal testimony, arthavati is anticipated position or presumption, and anubhalabdhi, the absence of something, is also a kind of an information or knowledge. And this pramana shastram is said by Bhata Mimamsas also. And of course, there are different schools of philosophy who don't fully accept all these pramanas. Nayayikas and Vaisheshikas and Sankhyas and Yogas, they don't accept these 6 pramanas. They accept much pratyaksha, anumana, upamana, shabda, depending upon the system of philosophy. 3 or 4 pramanas are only acceptable. And there are some fringe philosophical schools which go to the extent of diluting the pramana shastra, if that could be used as a way of explaining it. That means they add 4 more pramanas: sambhava, aitihya, cheshta and pariseshya. Sambhava is an event that's happened in our life which we use to understand something. Aitihya is hearsay, cheshta is external gesture, and pariseshya is actually deduction, a kind of removing or excluding all impossibilities. Then we are left with one possibility, it's called pariseshya. So sambhava is an event, aitihya is an hearsay which may not be acceptable to Vedantins or those philosophical schools which accept only 5 or 6 pramanas. And then cheshta is a gesture which may all be included, broadly speaking, in inference or analogy, or perhaps anubhalabdhi, or maybe arthavati and inference, anumana can also accommodate many of these extended pramanas. But the point is, Vedantists emphasize the idea that Atman is beyond all these pramanas. It is called Sarva Pramana Avati. And it is also beyond verbalization. You cannot explain it by words. When you want to explain something, to define or interpret and understand, even to relate in our mind intellectually, we need a lot of associations. It could be that we may try to understand certain things, dravya, already well known, obvious, jadi is a species, or guna, certain properties and characteristics, action, certain karmas, or maybe some relationship. So this is how we normally try to verbalize, define or explain things. Atman doesn't belong to any of these categories. We have not seen Atman. Like sun is obvious. We cannot tell anyone that Atman is like sun. And then we can't say that Atman belongs to a particular species. Through jadi also we cannot explain Atman. And it doesn't have any properties. Like a white flower, red flower, or yellow flower. It doesn't have any gunas, characteristics. And also Atman also cannot be explained in the context of some action, some activity. Like for example, a gardener, a musician is one who sings, a gardener is one who looks after the garden. So a driver is one who drives. So we cannot explain or verbalize or verbally explain or understand or define Atman in terms of certain actions and also some bandha, some relationship. This person is his nephew, his son, his daughter, and so on. So Atman is beyond description, beyond explanation. It's equal to Panja Shabda Pravritti Nirodha, and Atma is Sarva Pramanavati. It is beyond all the pramanas, because pramana, prameya and pramata, these three factors exist only just below the experience level, just below the aparokshanubhuti level. So Atman is properly understood only at the level of aparokshanubhuti. That's the idea behind. That's why the Gita says this Atman is avyakta, achintya and avikarya. It is unchanging. It is beyond any changes. Again, tasmadevam viditvainam. Therefore, you understand this. So once we understand that this Atman is avyakta, achintya and avikarya, it is unmanifest, it is unthinkable and unchanging. Once we understand this and then do sravana, manana, nididhyasana, vichara, and also try to fully acquire the sadhana sadhushta sambatti, then slowly we realize the fact that we are something other than this physical body which changes, which is not avikarya, and again which can be understood and explained, which is not achintya, which is pratyaksha, it is not avyakta. So this body cannot be Atman. This mind cannot be, because mind can be inferred, intellect can be inferred, thoughts can be analyzed and inferred and understood using any of the pramanas. Atman is sarva pramana avati. Therefore, once we understand this, then it's easy for us to direct our mananam and meditation. Atayeva achintyaha ayam yadhi indriya gocharam vastu tat chinta vishayatva apatyade ayam tu atma anindriya gocharatva achintyaha avikarega ayam yatha kshiram dadyadanjanadina vikari tat tatha ayam atma na tatha ayam atma. So Bhashyam continues, it is avikarya, it doesn't change, it is unchanging, it is immutable. Yata kshiram dadhyaranjanadina vikari na tatha ayamatma. This like milk. Milk, when mixed with buttermilk, it undergoes a change. It undergoes a vikara. It becomes something else. Atman doesn't undergo this kind of vikara. Niravevatva cha avikriyaka. And then this Atman is not constituted by different parts coming together to form one complex entity. No, not compound entity. No. Atman is Niravayava. Therefore, it cannot undergo any change. Any entity which is constituted by different entities coming together can undergo a change when one of the parts undergoes a change. It changes its properties, its characteristics and its tendencies. Atman doesn't change. Atman remains unchanging. Nahi niravayavam kinjit vikriyatmakam drishtam. We can never see anything which is niravayava, which is not composed of parts, undergoing any kind of change. Avikriyatva avikariha ayamatma, because it is beyond all changes, it is avikarya. Tasma eva yathokta pragarena enam atmanam viditva tum na anusochitum arhasi khantaham esham maya ete hanyante iti. Lord Krishna gives an advice. Therefore, this Atman spoken of above, discussed above, that's your true nature. Then you have no reason to worry about anything. Now, many of our great commentators like Madhusudana Saraswati has given very elaborate and very interesting descriptions of this particular aspect of Vedanta philosophy. So perhaps we will discuss this when we take up the next verse. The idea continues, the philosophical discussion continues. Atmanaga anityatva abhivagamya idam uchyate. So, this is a very interesting point discussed. Well, this Atma is actually eternal, immortal, unchanging, immutable, unthinkable. It is avyakta and so. Now suppose for argument's sake, suppose you take for granted, just for clarifying one idea, suppose this Atma is non-eternal, then also you have no reason to worry about anything. That's what Lord Krishna is saying here. Atachainam nityajadam nityam va manyase mrudam tathabitvam mahabahu naivam shochidam arhasi. And then even if you think, so abhyupagamya siddhanta will describe that. Again, there's a way of a methodology of explaining one idea. That is, in case, suppose for argument's sake, you take it otherwise, contrary to what actually it is, contrary to the truth, still there is no reason for you to worry about. That is the point emphasized. It is called Abhyubhagama Siddhanta, which we will discuss in course of time. So Lord Krishna says, and then even if you think that this Atman, it's born, it lives, it dies and reborn, constantly being born and constantly being dead. Even in that case, you don't have any reason to worry about anything, to grieve about anything. Adacha iti abhivagamarthaka. So Bhashyakara says he is eager to point out one very, very important aspect of this sloka. Artha cha iti abhivagamarthaka. It is called abhivagama siddhanta. So atacha enam nityajadam. That verse, atha cha iti abhyubhagama siddhanta or abhyubhagama artha. That's the Bhashyakara says. In order to understand this, we have to keep a few important points here. So, there are different approaches in Indian philosophy, especially with regard to other philosophical schools, comparative approaches in Indian philosophy. So, they are called Sarvatantra Siddhantaha, and then Adhikarana Siddhantaha, Pratitantra Siddhantaha, and Abhyubhagama Siddhantaha. These are the four important approaches in Indian philosophy. In Sarvatantra Siddhanta, certain views acceptable to all systems are recognized. For example, Indriyartha, Indriya senses and objects perceived and understood by the senses. So there are external sense objects and senses, they connect with each other. And Panchatanmatras, it is accepted in Sankhya system, Yoga system, and also in Vedanta system, in all the theistic systems, and also in Buddhist philosophy. So Indriyas, Indriyarthas, mind, all these ideas are more or less common views, common grounds in most of these Indian philosophical schools. So, certain common views acceptable to all systems called Sarvatantra Siddhanta, that particular approach to recognize the common grounds of a number of philosophical schools. The second approach is Pratitantra Siddhanta, where certain ideas are acceptable, Siddham or Sivikaryam, so far as Samana Tantra, Samana Shastras are concerned. So, there are certain ideas commonly accepted. For example, the effect pre-exists in cause. Satkaryavada is common for Yoga, Sankhya and also Vedanta. But Sankhyas believe in the Parinama aspect, but Vedantists believe in the Vivarta aspect. So Advaitins believe in Vivarta aspect. Of course, Ramanuja and Madhva and many systems believe in some kind of Brahma Parinamavada, the Ishvara Parinamavada, etc. But Sankhyas believe in the Prakriti Parinamavada. So the Satkaryavada aspect is common, that is the effect pre-exists in cause is common, but within that there is a difference, Parinamavada for Sankhyas and Vivarta for Advaitins. But Nayayikas and Vaisheshikas believe in Asatkaryavada. They do not accept the idea that effect could pre-exist in cause. They believe that every effect is a new manifestation, a new product, a new entity. So, Pratitantra Siddhanta implies Sivikaryam or Siddham for Samana Shastras, but not acceptable or agreeable to Anya Shastras. So, examples are Arambhavada or Asatkaryavada for Nayayikas and Satkaryavada or Parinama and Vivartavada for Vedantins and Sankhyas. The third one is Adhikarana Siddhanta. That is, when you establish one Siddhanta, then simultaneously many other notions are also automatically accepted or taken for granted. It is called Adhikarana Siddhanta. For example, plurality or Nanatvam of all Indriyas, each of these Indriyas, eyes, ears, nostrils, all the Panja, Jnanendriyas, these are all more or less taken for granted. The next one is Abhyubhagama Siddhanta, where you take for granted certain ideas as if they are true, just to analyze and go deeper, and eventually perhaps to get out of this notion. So it is, for example, here Bhashyakara says, Atmanaha anityatvam abhibagamya idam uchyate. So the abhibagama siddhanta is employed here. Suppose Lord Krishna tells Arjuna, even you believe that this Atman is anitya, Atman takes birth, lives, dies and is reborn. Even if you believe that, still there is absolutely no reason at all for you to grieve. So that means nattum sochidum arhasi. That idea is emphasized again and again. That's important because these Bauddhas and Lokayikatikas, Indian materialists, they all believe in different pramanas. So as a common principle, Lord Krishna says, even if you are a Charvaka, thinking that this body comes and goes, nothing beyond that, or even if you are a Bauddha, even if you don't accept the Advaitic principle of the eternal nature, the imperishable nature of Atman, the immutability of Atman, still there is absolutely no cause for you to worry about anything. That idea is emphasized. Yenam pragadam atmanam nityajatam loka prasiddhyam pratyaneka sarirutpattim jato jata idi manyase tatha pratidat vinasham nityam va manyase mudam muda iti. So in common, for example, normally in common parlance, you think that this Atman that we are discussing is taking birth and lives, and then it disappears and it dies out. Even then, there is no reason for you to worry about anything. Tathapi tathabhavini api atmani tvam mahabahu evam na sochidam arhasi. Even if you think that this Atman is anitya, contrary to what the Lord teaches, even if you believe this Atman is not nitya, it is changing all the time, still there is no reason for you to grieve. Because death to one who is born and birth for one who is dead, these two things are inevitable. Of course, the idea is, in common parlance, in common understanding, anyone who dies without reaching Jnana, or anyone who dies retaining all the samskaras, will have to be born again to fulfill those unfulfilled and manifested samskaras, or to fulfill unfulfilled desires. So that point is, one who dies will be reborn, one who is born will die one day. So that common loka nyaya is put forward again to emphasize the fact, Arjuna, you have no reason to worry about anything. Jatasya ki dhruva murtihu dhruvam janna mudasya ja tasmat apariharyarthi nattum sochidum arhasi. So that idea is emphasized again and again. Here, of course, great thinkers like Madhusudana Saraswati has explained this again and again. He gives a detailed analysis of different views of some of the most prominent schools of Indian philosophy of his time, that is early 16th century. So, for example, he refers to the Atma Jnana Swarupaka Pradikshana Vinashi Idi Saugataha. Saugata is Bauddhas. So Madhusudana says, Buddhist idealists, for example, they believe that this Atma is momentary, it's just a flowing moments of consciousness, existing only for one kshana, one moment, changing every moment and giving birth to another entity in another kshana, which again undergoes changes. So this so-called Atman as an Avinashi, Nitya, Avikarya doesn't exist according to Bautas. According to them, what exists is Atma Jnana Swarupa Pradikshana Vinashi. Every kshanam, every moment, it undergoes change, it dies, so everything is kshanika. This is the view of the very particular idealist school of Buddhist, the Mahayana schools, mostly Shunyavadins and Vijnana, Yogacara schools, they believe that. Then there is a much more primitive and much more ancient school of philosophy called Lokayika. Lokayitika Mata is called Indian materialists. Their belief is Dehe eva Atma, such as Thiropi, Anukshana Parinami. They believe Deha eva Atma. What we call Atman is nothing but this human body that you can see with his Pratyaksha Siddham, which you don't need even Anumana Pramana to understand. So Deha eva Atma. This is the view of Indian school of materialism. It's called Chavaka Matam or Lokayitika Matam. So this Thirobi, it exists, but then it continuously changes. Anukshana Parinami, Jayade Nasyadicha. Iti Pratyaksha Siddhameva Etat Iti Lokayitika. So they believe this Atma is Nitya Eva Atma, Jayade Mriyate Jayati. So this idea behind. Nayayikas and Tarkikas also believe this Atma is Nitya, like Vedantins, but they believe Atma Jayate Mriyate. So how Nitya can be born and can die, the logical fallacy is not fully addressed by the Nayayikas, at least to the satisfaction of Vedantins or Dvaitins. So these ideas are put forward by Madhusudana in his well-known work on the Gita called Gurartha-dipika, to understand, to give a better view of the uniqueness of Vedantic principle, uniqueness of Shankaracharya's philosophy. Because when Buddhists believe Atma Jnana Swarupa Pradikshana Vinashi, and Lokayatikas believe Deha eva Atma, and Nayayikas believe Nitya eva Atma, so Jayate Mriyate Jayati. That means, according to Buddhists, Atma is something that undergoes change every moment. It is just a kind of stream consciousness. And Lokayatikas believe the so-called Atma is nothing but beyond this body. And Nayayikas believe this Atma is immutable, is Nitya, but is subject to birth and death. In this context, Advaitins believe this Atma is beyond intellectual perception, beyond the reach of any of the pramanas, and beyond verbalization. It is something that could only be experienced as our true inner self. It is Anubhavaika Vedyam. So, in order to project this idea, Lord Krishna is making a simple statement, which is the common understanding of everyone. Death is certain to anyone who is born, and birth also is certain to anyone who is dead. Anyone who dies, with all the samskaras and vasanas intact, anyone who dies before Jnana Prapti, before reaching the highest Advaitic realization, is bound to be born again. There is no choice. Tasmat apariharyarthe. Therefore, it is totally apariharya. Apariharya means totally unavoidable. There is no way out of it. Everyone who is born will have to die unless he realizes that he is the deathless Atman. Then also the body will certainly disappear, but he will have reached a state where he will be able to interpret himself to be something other than this body, mind and intellect. He will experience his identity, his true identity with the imperishable, unchanging Atman. So for such a person, really there is no death, because that person realizes that he is the deathless Atman. But till that experience, that Advaitic experience, Aparokshanubhuti is reached, death is apariharya. Death for a person who is born, and birth for a person who dies without realization of the supreme truth is unavoidable, apariharya. So there is no reason, there is no need for you to worry at all. So Lord Krishna uses different methods to address Arjuna's problem. First, he tries to convince Arjuna that he is something other than this psychophysical mechanism. It may take some time, it may not be easy for us to realize this. At first, it may come as an idea, and then we have to enrich this idea through vichara, through contemplation, through karma yoga. Every unselfish act, every unselfish deed, without any selfish purpose, makes our mind pure, removes all unhealthy, undesirable vrittis, vasanas and samskaras, creates new samskaras, which eventually helps us to become more sattvic. And then once we get established in this karma yoga ideal, new samskaras and vrittis are not created. All these samskaras and vrittis are countered or neutralized. Mind becomes pure. Such a person will eventually realize that he is this Atman. So karmanishthāyaha chitta suddhidvārena purushartha hedutvam na swadandrena jnana nisthātu swadandrena purushartha heduhu anyan apeksha. Every unselfish act and every unselfish deed becomes a great contribution, a great enrichment to this spiritual endeavor. In fact, in the 6th chapter, Arjuna, after listening to all these ideas, then he was taught the essence of Karma Yoga in the 3rd chapter. He was taught Dhyana in the 6th chapter. And after listening to all these ideas, Arjuna does ask one question. And that should be understood in the context of the 27th verse. That is, death is certain who is born, to anyone who is born, and rebirth is certain for anyone who dies. There is no way out. It is apariharya, it is unavoidable. So what should be our effort? So Arjuna asked this question in the 6th chapter. Ayadi shraddhayo pedo yoga charita manasaha aprapi yoga samsiddhim kam gatim Krishna gicchati. Suppose a person who has not fully succeeded in subduing his desires, who has not fully succeeded in controlling his senses, his mind, or not fully attained sadhana chatushtaya sampatti or chitta siddhi, and he dies before reaching the goal. What happens to such a person? What happens to the good deeds he has done, good spiritual practices he has done, or good actions he has done? Will everything be lost? So Arjuna drives home this anxiety. Kachino bhayavibrashtaha chinna pramiva nasyati apadishto mahabahu vimudho brahmanapati. So such a person will perish like a cloud that is scattered by strong winds in the sky? Or some of those good actions, the results of good spiritual practices, good actions will remain with us? What is going to happen? Please answer my question. In answer to this, Lord Krishna gives a great promise. Parthana iveka namutra vinasastasya vidyade naki kalyanakrit kaschit durgadim tadagachati. Whatever little you do, kalyanakrit, anyone who does some noble deed, speaks, a person who speaks one noble word, thinks one noble deed, does some noble action, does some spiritual practice, prayer, meditation, or reading holy scriptures, or helping people, that person will not perish. whatever little spiritual practices he has done in this life will remain with him, and when he is born again, it will help him to continue his spiritual journey further and will help him in his spiritual progress further. So this is a very great promise Lord Krishna gives. Tattradam buddhi samyogam labhade pavodekikam yadadija tato bhuya samsiddho kuranantana. When he is born again, what happens? With these samskaras, good samskaras, vasanas, impressions, the results of good actions and spiritual practices in this life will be born again with him as a spiritual asset, spiritual wealth, and that will help him to continue his spiritual journey. His mind, buddhi samyogam, his mind or his intellect, which is full of these good spiritual samskaras, will again connect with some spiritual practices. He will continue his spiritual journey further forward. Purvabhyasena tenaiva kriyadehi avashopi saha jitnyasurapi yogasya shabda brahmadi vartade. So on the strength of this previous practice, purvabhyasena means he has already done a lot of spiritual practice in the past. That will prompt him, force him to go forward in spiritual life. In fact, he will be helpless, he will be forced, even if he is unwilling. The purvabhyasa samskara, the good samskaras, the samskaras of vrittis or vasanas or impressions of good actions and good words and good deeds he has done, will prompt him, help him, encourage him to go forward and continue his spiritual journey. So that's why Lord Krishna makes a point here, jadasya dhruva mrityu dhruvam janma mridasya cha. So you need not worry at all, because death is certain for anyone who is born, and rebirth is also guaranteed for anyone who dies. And when you are born again, all the good actions you have done, all the good spiritual practices you have done will be with you, will help you to go forward again in your spiritual life. Jadasya hi labdha janmanah dhruva abhibhijare mrityu maranam dhruvam janma mridasya cha tasmat apariharyega ayam janma marana lakshanaka arthaga tasmin apariharye arthe nattum chochidum arhasi. So Lord Krishna says, you have no reason at all to worry about anything, because it is unavoidable. It is not your choice. It is apariharya. It cannot be avoided. It is unavoidable. We will continue the discussion of the 27th verse of the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita with Bhashyam in the next session. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.